Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the Powell Press. I'm State Senator Bobby Powell representing Senate District 30 in Palm Beach County. And this is the fifth week of the 2019 legislative session, and it was very, very busy for my office in particular. This week I spoke out against several controversial bills. I co-hosted one of the premier events here in Tallahassee, and we continue work on the legislative process. As I discussed last week, we'll also talk about Amendment 4. So as we get started, here's our look back at the fifth week of the 2019 legislative session. Remember last week when I indicated that we would talk more about Amendment 4? Well, this week I'll give you a little bit of detail with regard to where that is in the process. As you know, the citizens of the state of Florida voted 65% in favor of restoring the rights of former felons to participate in the legislative process, to be allowed to vote and have their rights restored. I believe, along with the Democratic Caucus and the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, that the constitutional amendment that was passed in November is self-implementing. Now in the House and the Senate, there are bills moving through that require fees or restitution in order to be allowed to vote and participate in the process. As a member of both caucuses that I indicated earlier, we stand against any barriers that would prevent people from having full access to their rights. As I indicated, we believe that this constitutional amendment is self-implementing. Therefore, as it relates to any legislation moving through the process, we will not vote in favor of it. As more people begin to pay attention to the decisions being made in Tallahassee, I participated in a total of 4 press conferences to make my voice heard on some of the most pressing issues of this legislative session. We started off the week with a press conference hosted by the new Florida majority, where I urged my colleagues to pass a bill that I've sponsored, which would ensure a fair and accurate count in the 2020 decennial census. Today marks 1 year before the census, and we as a state must do everything within our power to make sure that each and every citizen is counted. Each and every person who lives here in the state of Florida and the United States is counted. Taking an accurate count of the Florida residents by conducting a census impacts everything from the school lunch programs for our children to Medicare for our seniors. It's time for us to get serious about the 2020 decennial census. This week, we also saw students from across the state make their way to Tallahassee as part of the March for Our Lives movement to pressure their elected officials to vote no on a bill which would allow teachers to carry guns on school grounds. I stood in solidarity with these students at a press conference where our message was simple: let our teachers teach. More guns at schools is never the answer, and I hope my colleagues will consider that when they vote with regard to this piece of legislation. One of the premier events that we hold in Tallahassee every year is our Legislative Fellowship Prayer Breakfast. This year, I am the co-chair with State Senator Doug Broxson, and this week, it was an enormous and gigantic week with regard to that prayer breakfast. We hosted the president of Ave Maria College, President Jim Toohey, who came and brought a great message to us. We also heard from the Senate President Bill Galvano, as well as the Speaker of the House, Jose Oliva. We also had the governor of our state, Ron DeSantis, bring us a message about dignity and peace as we move forward and pray for the welfare of our great state. And it is always a pleasure to host visitors from Palm Beach County, and this week was no different as we welcome the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated to the Capitol for Delta Days. I met with a group of Deltas from District 30 to discuss their legislative priorities. Also, we were greeted by a delegation from the Glades as part of the Glades Lives Matter Day at the Capitol on Tuesday. It was a humbling experience to receive an award from the group for my advocacy work on behalf of their community. Finally, this week saw no shortage of legislative action as I presented 3 bills and continued to work on passing the budget for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. The first bill I presented was Senate Bill 1418. Which, among other things, helps schools and mental health professionals identify and report signs of suicide and violence among those who suffer from a mental illness. I also presented Senate Bill 838 the next day, which protects identifying information of people who seek mental health treatment from being released to the public. Both bills passed unanimously through committee and now head to the next committee stop. And we also saw floor action this week as we passed our less pendants legislation on the floor of the Senate. It passed unanimously, as we've discussed in our previous weeks of the Powell Press. That's the legislation that deals with less pendants and judicial process of servers. We're excited to move that piece of legislation to the desk of our governor. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you for joining us for the Powell Press. This is our 5th week edition. We're more than halfway through the Florida legislative session of 2019, and we're continuing to move forward aggressively on many of the issues that will affect you at home and across the state of Florida. Thank you for joining us. Remember, a life of service is a life that counts. Join us next week for the 6th edition of the Powell Press.